Hi, I'm David Clark. I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about a few bits and pieces that everybody should know about. You're familiar, I hope, already with the Docent page. Everybody knows how to get there. SDMaritime.org. Is this better with the mic?
Yes.
Yeah. SDMaritime.org. There's a shortcut. If you just go /Docent, that will take you to get-involved/Docent. Lots of things on there, well worth checking out. Please spend a little time with that page to see all the good stuff we got for you there. Layout of the ships, I hope you're already somewhat familiar. Everybody, I know Jim Cassidy talked about this with you last week. Everybody, if you haven't done so already, please take out your phone right now and put this phone number in it, 619-921-3261. That is not a personal cell phone. That is a cell phone that is passed from security person to security person 24/7, 365. This museum is never left unattended. 2 in the morning on New Year's Day, somebody's going to answer that phone. If you have a problem, if a guest has a medical issue, if there is some kind of other emergency, if someone gets hurt, call this number. Whoever has the security watch will answer it. They in turn will activate any needed ambulance or whatever it might be. So by all means, call security, stay with the person, and if you have somebody else nearby and you, for instance, are going to be asking security to get an ambulance, ask somebody else to go out to the curb and wave their arms at the ambulance so that when the ambulance pulls up and they're trying to figure out where in all this complex of ships and decks and hard to find where exactly is the issue, somebody at the curb can bring the EMS people back to the scene of the incident. Fire extinguishers for fire, evacuate guests, and we're going to look for fire extinguishers. Man overboard, life rings. You will find all of that information on the Docent page. The locations of emergency equipment, emergency procedures, locations of all the life rings. It's all on the Docent page, so do spend some time looking through that. You can find out where are all the life rings, where are the AEDs, where are the fire extinguishers. Oops. Oh yes, one more thing. No climbing in the rigging. If a guest is climbing, ask them once to get down. Firmly, politely, professionally, but firmly. It's not a request. It's a direction. Sir, I need you to get down out of the rigging right now. And by the way, it's always a sir. I've never had a woman do that. I've never seen a woman do that. As a general rule, women have more sense. But there's no climbing in the rigging. If somebody says, what do I have to do to climb the rig? The answer is join the sail crew. And even the sail crew don't go climbing just for grins. They do that when they climb, it's business. So we're very definite about this. It's not something that we allow at all. At various places around the ships, you'll find no climbing allowed in rigging signs. Let's talk about false advertising. The old saying, you give a dog a bad name, it's never going to live it down. Unfortunately, this photograph made in 1938, which is 20 years before this Maritime Museum of San Diego was even founded. Star of India was alongside. This is during the Depression, and there were, at the time, it cost 10 cents to come on board Star of India. The times were desperate. There was no money for anything, and in a misguided attempt to get more people to try to come on board. Can you see through me there? All right. Some fool put up this sign. It said, Star of India, slave ship, pirate ship, convict ship. That is a lie. We can prove that that's a lie. Britain outlawed the slave trade with the Slave Trade Act of 1807. It outlawed, that was trading in slaves. It outlawed slavery in all its forms in 1833, so that's 30 years before Star was ever built. Euterpe was launched in 1863. She never visited any slave trading ports. She was never a pirate ship or a convict ship. Sometimes people say, well, it went to Australia. Was it taking prisoners to Australia? And the answer is, Euterpe was built well after the transport of prisoners from England to Australia ended. So it could not have been involved in any of those evil trades or evil businesses. The reason I bring this up and emphasize it so much is, I have a couple of times had conversations with black folks out on the sidewalk. One case, a woman approached me, she was there with her husband, and said, is it true that this was a slave ship? And I said, no ma'am, it absolutely was not true, and we can prove it was not true, and we have all the logs from every time the ship ever went anywhere. It was never anything to do with that evil business, and we know that. And she was satisfied with that answer, and she and her husband went and actually bought it and came to the museum. However, I talked with another crew person who said they'd had essentially the same conversation, but the resolution of that, on that occasion, I wasn't there for that one, was the lady said, oh, you're just saying that because you work here. I know it was a slave ship. My grandfather told me it was a slave ship. And you can still find folks around San Diego who their grandparents remember a time when that story was still circulating. But if you hear anything, it's an unusual thing, but it does occasionally come up. I've had it happen several times, and somebody asks me about that. And you can politely, obviously, but very definitely say, we know that was never true, we can prove it, we've got the documents. A lot of us, especially around Halloween time, think it's fun to talk about ghosts and ghoulies and things like that. And there are talks about, is Star of India haunted? My take on that is there's no such thing as ghosts. This is ridiculous. However, a lot of us, especially around Halloween, think, ghost stories, that's kind of fun entertainment for the kiddies. However, keep in mind, in some Asian cultures, ghosts are actually not a laughing matter. There are some Asian cultures which take that really very seriously, and if you start talking about ghosts, there are some folks who will leave. So please be sensitive to that, be aware of that this is not the way that most of the folks in this room look at it. It's not necessarily the way that all of our guests would look at that.
So David, when a guest asks the question,
Yeah.
then you can answer, or because sometimes we get guests asking that.
My answer is there's no such thing as ghosts.
Got it.
That's, now, I know other people have other opinions about that. We can have that talk later, but just be aware. You don't necessarily want to start regaling people from Asian cultures with stories about Star of India being haunted. You might want to just leave that part out. Talking about General Museum information, this is just to point out that if you go to the General Museum information page at homepage, visit General Museum information, there's a select language thing right here that allows you to translate this into any of a variety of languages, and that can be very helpful. So just one more resource for you as a docent to keep in mind. For example, there's Chinese, and it's just a click on a menu on the docent page. I have occasionally been trying to communicate with guests who are deaf, and it turns out you can use your smartphone to create, by using a microphone, to create a text message that somebody can read. You can also use a smartphone with Google Translate you can type in, welcome aboard, I'm the Maritime Museum volunteer, may I answer any questions for you? And you can come up with any of all the languages that Google Translate will provide you with. So it's another, and then people in turn, you can hand them your phone and they can type in a reply, and you can then get Google Translate to turn that into a language that you recognize. It's another very, very handy thing. Again, it doesn't come up all the time, but it's a very convenient thing to have available.
That's a point of reference on that. You can also use your phone as a translator itself.
That's right.
You can do it, it'll in their language, and then you give them the phone.
Exactly.
And you can actually have it.
So these are the kind of things you might want to try out in advance, but doesn't come up all the time, but it can be very convenient. We occasionally get asked about the Soviet submarine. We had from about 2002, I think, the Soviet sub got here. 2005 it came here, and it was in very sad shape when we got it. And it got sadder as the years went by, and eventually in 2022, it was determined that this needed to be scrapped, and it was. So we still occasionally get asked, I was asked just on Sunday about where's the Russian sub? And the answer is, after all this time, this is the ship that was built in 1968, I believe, 67. And ultimately it was scrapped, and it is, so that's why it's not on display. It was formerly on display. You may well get asked about this. February 22, it was towed and Sonata to be scrapped. This is just some high points which Ken Golden will discuss with you at greater length later about the policy on Maritime Museum sailing events on California to San Salvador. The upshot is, as docents, we need to go through Ken Golden to see about the possibility of going along and serving as a docent on one of the sailing events. Talk to Ken about that. I'm not going to go through all these details. I just love this photograph, or this painting from the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. It's called The Last of England. And this is an emigrant couple with the White Cliffs of Dover behind them. They are setting out on a voyage to an unknown world. When we talk about the emigrant voyages on Star of India, you have to keep in mind that these are people who have the grit and the courage to leave everything they had ever known and everyone they had ever known in order to try to make a better life in the new world. And that deserves great respect. I have great respect for immigrants. That's a very tough thing to leave everything you know. And in this case, a thing that really I find very touching is the lady is holding her baby's hand, which she's keeping warm under her shawl. That image really gets me. That's a tough thing for someone to do. That's all I have. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
For those of you who are new to our group, I'd like to introduce Susan Sirota. Susan, for a long time, ran our education program and has been our vice president at the museum for how many years? A long time. And she'll be talking to us today about the building of the San Salvador. So please welcome Susan.
Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. I have to get used to this fluffy microphone now. All right. All right. Well, good morning and thank you for all the new people for coming to become docents, and thank you very much for my friends who've been here many years. The question of how long have I been vice president? I think I became vice president in 2016. I think that's right. I don't know, Ray, are you here?
That sounds right.
Does that sound right? Okay.
Yeah.
But I started the museum in '97, and so I'm actually wearing my docent badge right here.
Oh, beautiful.
I started with the education department, as Dr. Cassidy said, and from essentially being hired to write all the science curriculum that the museum does now, and then run the entire education department where we brought millennium history programs from the Ocean Institute, then the Orange County Reading Institute over to the museum. I think I was ed director for 15 years. And then while we were building San Salvador, I got moved to development director because our development director had a different of opinion from Dr. Ashley. And so I got thrown into development with the idea that when Mark Montijo, who was our vice president for many years, when he was to retire, that I would take his position. So when he left, I then became vice president. So that's the litany of how I got here. And I think that's sort of the reason why I tell this story, or the reason why I'm asked by your curriculum schedules for the docents to tell the San Salvador story, is because Mark Montijo, the vice president, gave the San Salvador talk. And the reason why Mark gave the San Salvador talk is because Ray did the introduction like he had last week. Everyone took notes because there'll be a quiz. And then Mark went after Ray, and then Mark was our third and last project manager for San Salvador. So the docents who were with us during that time of building San Salvador came with us through that whole process. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a story about the San Salvador, and I'm also going to then inform you of how you can be better docents for any of our ships using the San Salvador model of telling stories to you. So a lot of the stories that I'm going to tell you, I was told that if I'm on this side of the pole, I won't be on camera. I'll leave the microphone over here for a second.
A lot of the stories I tell you, you're not going to tell other people.
This is for today. This is my last time telling the story, and it's sad and bittersweet for me. So I will be telling you some fun stories for your own personal diaries, but they're not necessarily things you would tell other people, but you get the inside story, okay? And if I say something that's controversial, I definitely do not tell other people. Okay. All right. I'm going to also talk about some themes that hopefully you would have heard last week in Dr. Ashley's introduction presentation, because these themes not only resonate for my personal journey with the museum, but in the stories that we tell, I can find a lot of connections, and I bet you would too. So I'll sort of highlight them. And some of them have nothing to do with things that Dr. Ashley has put into our heads, such as size actually does matter, and it is still what you do with it that counts. And the ones that you'll, I know, you gotta
Turn the camera off now.
Maybe that should have been on the side. All right. Other themes such as history was and is not inevitable is going to come out in the story. And also one that you would have heard of visits to voyages. That's kind of like the overriding thing of what you're doing right now. And the one that I think resonates the most, and I'm going to go back to it at the end, has to do with San Salvador being, from the very beginning, purpose-built. And the purpose that she was built for, we'll get to at the end. It was for exploration. However, there's a bigger issue there. And these ships that we're on, today's story is San Salvador, but you're learning about all of our ships in our fleet, our historic fleet. And each of the ships has their own story, but you as docents will be telling their stories, and we are here to help preserve those ships and their stories. But the theme that Dr. Ashley has instilled in a lot of us is that while the ships, we're here to support the ships support us. And if I take that a little bit further, in building ships, we are also building our own stories and our connections with those ships. So here's mine that I'm sharing with you, and we'll learn about San Salvador in the meantime. So let me get the magic wand. Oh, and the other thing, as an education person originally and still, I will leave time for questions at the end. But if a question comes to you now, I'd like to address it when you have your question, because oftentimes we forget, and I'm like, oh. And the other reason I like doing that is I like to have a dialogue with you, not just me presenting to you. Is that an agreement? Is everyone good with that? All right, good. So why San Salvador? Why did we build a ship? In that theme of history is not inevitable. If you look outside right now to the beautiful ship that you're going to be hearing on this afternoon, you'd be like, oh, of course they built that. It's amazing, and of course, why wouldn't they have built that? Or yes, they were going to do it. But in fact, some of those stories today, it was not. It was more likely that ship was going to sink us. And it nearly did. But we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the why. We're going to talk about the who, when, where, how. And I'm going to share a lot of resources with you because I could just give you the history lesson alone about Cabrillo. I don't need to, because all of that work and information has been compiled by many people that are sitting in this room. And you can get good at that on your own. All right, so why San Salvador? Well, here's the Star of India. It's on our logo, it's our flagship. We have a crazy collection, eclectic collection of ships. When I got here, there was the Star of India, the Berkeley, and the Vidia, and that's it. And now we have, what, 12 vessels? Is that right? I don't even know, I'm not counting. Something like that, probably a dozen. And they don't make a lot of sense exactly. And the idea of San Salvador being the first chapter in a collection of historic ships that tell San Diego's history, or Maritime Pacific history, it makes a lot of sense. And it wasn't our idea originally. I believe it was the Port of San Diego's idea. Is that right, Ray?
It was a combination of that and my predecessor.
Ah, okay, so it wasn't the people that you're seeing today's idea. It came to us from before. But doing something and having an idea are way two different ideas. We always have more ideas than the resources or the ability to do things. So taking this on was a huge challenge. It was about 20 years of research in combination of like going back and forth on the idea, conferences, historical papers, different things talking about it, of what it would look like, of what design it would be, before we ever really got serious about doing this project. The museum had a lot of ships. However, we weren't really organized to tell a chronological narrative. And then when you saw what we looked like, still, it's just it's a boatyard, really. And I say this today because in the same way that we took on the San Salvador project, something that was unlikely to be accomplished, something that was an enormous financial task, the project was several times our annual operational budget. On paper, it made no sense to build this boat. It was a great idea, but so the end budget, I've read lots of different figures, but when I was development director, I saw in the ledgers of what I was working with, and this included paid labor that wasn't paid, like volunteer labor. I saw at the end of what we were looking at, I saw the figures, but Ray will argue with me, but he doesn't have the microphone. I saw $17.8 million at the end. And I believe she's quoted at more or less 6-point-something million of real cash, and then there's 6-point-something of like volunteer and donated things, so that's around 12-13 million, but I saw a lot more with other things by the time it was all said and done. We can argue about the price tag later, but the important point to take here is that this was more money than the museum had, or would be able to fundraise under normal circumstances. So why take on this risk? Well, we were financially no different than we are today. Maritime museums do not make a lot of money. We are constantly at risk. And Ray determined that the risk of not doing San Salvador to keep us going was greater than the risk it took to build San Salvador. And that sounds easy to say, but that is not easy to do. And if you want to think of one reason of why Dr. Ashley was knighted by Spain for this project, it was he took on that risk. Because when we started, it looked idyllic and dreamy, I know. We had, lots of people in the community saying, well, it's this important origin story for San Diego, and Ray went out and gave, I don't know, I saw at least 200 of these lectures, you probably did too, about, it's all over our city, you can't throw a cat in California without hitting something with Cabrillo's name. We could garner money and resources from the community to build her. We had kids doing ship pictures. We had lots of things informing us to build the ship, but it really was a risk. And taking that risk was very scary. And once we started, getting the designs, there were a lot of pitfalls and things that happened, which will be some of our fun stories. But I want you to know, the new people, it's not all dire doom and gloom, because it was a successful story, and it still is a successful story. But I want you to hear some of these stories. I want you to know what her grand mission is, how we use her, how we have used her, what resources are available, and how you can participate by the end of this talk. All right, so we're gonna go through a bunch of history, but I'd rather show you where you can find all this history. How many people have been to the website? Raise your hand. How many people have gone to the education page for Explore? All right, those of you that aren't raising your hands, I will show you somewhere in this presentation the Explore page and how to get there. It will go through the entire history, every exhibit panel, 5 videos that are all historically educational. There's 7 lesson plans if you're a young person to get through. There's models you can build in San Salvador. And you can learn about the history of San Salvador and why we built her. This is Dr. Cassidy at the petroglyph site of what we think is San Salvador's voyage that was essentially immortalized by Kumeyaay petroglyph rock art. What was informed us in its design, this is the wreck of Labrador. This is, I think, the tree from Mary Rose. All the information that we took from outside this organization that built San Salvador, all this information is part of the resources that I will share with you. When we laid the keel in 2011, I believe, that was the start of this risky idea coming to life for the museum. And over the course of 4.5, 5 years, roughly 450 volunteers built this ship with a small crew of professional shipwrights. Raise your hand if you had something to do with building San Salvador. So a lot of the people in this room are your resources. I believe there's 12 different species of wood that went into our San Salvador. So there was problems along the way of building our San Salvador that again tell us why it was such a risky endeavor. The supply of wood for the ship got lost, and we had already essentially brokered for the world supply of the ship of the wood that we needed for the ship, and then it didn't make it to our shores. Concomitant to the fact that the original lamination system for the wood on the ship failed, and essentially it looked like someone dropped the wood out of a 4-story building. And so they had to redesign how they, I believe, am I using the right term, fasten things? You had to redesign the fastening system for the ship?
It went from, Susan, it went from a laminated system like Californian has to a traditional double sawn system.
Did everyone hear that? It went from laminating to double saw.
Double sawn construction.
Double sawing. Obviously, I'm not a shipwright, but I can tell you, just looking at the wood and what the process had done, how it had failed, you clearly wouldn't want to be anywhere near this. We also had problems with the site where we built San Salvador because it wasn't our land, and that was an interesting place to build a ship. It was great for displays and educational purposes, not the best for launching a ship. But this is what we came up for the launch. It was really fun, what can I say? The launch had a really dramatic pause of essentially 24 hours because as the boat rose to the launch site with a house mover, it sort of stopped, and the people that knew how to fix the problem were in Italy, so we had to wait to communicate with them. Needless to say, it did get onto the water, and we did sail it down the bay, and then we finished the rigging. We finished the rigging down in the shipyard, and then also at the back at the museum in 2016. I believe some of you might be in that photo, but I can't tell, my eyes aren't that good. And when we sailed her for the first time in 2016, essentially, the museum had already experienced a cut in our pay because the ship took a lot of money. But we had fortified a relationship with the state of California to fund her. The volunteer effort for the shipbuilding allowed us to do this project because the labor involved in it could be floated over many years. And that was something that nobody would have imagined other than Ray betting on that. So he's a good gambler, what can I say? And then of course, while all of this was happening, we had to continue to raise funds. We had to continue to appease, I don't want to say the natives, that's too negative, the Native American community who did not like the symbol of San Salvador being built. And while we had their participation at the build site, it still meant a difficult thing for their history. And so that's something that we had to manage throughout the process. But thanks to what we did with the ship later in her history, it did help us in that area. But that doesn't mean that that won't change, because like the wind, that sort of opposition to the ship comes and goes, and that's something that everybody wants to be educated on, so that if you face, I would say, difficult questions from visitors, you have answers and you have stories to help get through those discussions. So sailing the San Salvador, once it was built, was how we used it, but how we used it had to be developed many years before. We had 4 National Endowment for Humanities grants while we were building the ship that developed a lot of the educational products and programming that we then used on what we called the Pacific Heritage Tour. And the Pacific Heritage Tour was to take the ship as a museum up the coast of California and visit other maritime museums. And this process usually was over the course of a month or so. That was about the length of time that Ray and I could be gone without everyone else getting too angry here. And we visited the ports of Los Angeles, Ventura, Santa Barbara, Monterey, Morro Bay, and Ensenada over the course of 5 different Pacific Heritage Tours, usually more than one port at a time, except for the year that we went to Ensenada. We started the tours in 2016, we went in 2017, 18, 19, and then break of COVID, and the last one we did was 2023. If you were sailing either as a guest on the Adventure Legs or as crew on any Pacific Heritage Tours, raise your hand. All right, so you have lots of people again in this room to help tell you what that's all about. We'll go into that a little bit in more detail. This is just my favorite picture of San Salvador, that's why it's here. It is real, it does look like a model to me. When we would take the ship away to different ports on a Pacific Heritage Tour, the idea was to give the audience a glimpse of what the ship would look like as though the crew of 1542 abandoned her, and then you were coming to see it. So she's an exhibit when she goes away, and on board we decorate her with some of the stuff that you still see on the ship that's here in San Diego, but much more expansive with what I call living props. So we have animals, we have the smells and sounds of animals, but without actual real animals. But we do have real food, which was always really fun having people sometimes sample it. Showing different aspects of her passenger load and what they ate, and historically what they ate, and also talking about the Columbian Exchange. And the most important thing here though is we had to train the volunteers of these different organizations that we partner with, these other maritime museums up and down the state, even in Mexico, that was a really fun one, how to interpret the ship. So you as a new docent volunteer, you have at your disposal which is online. I have to make this my hand. An exhibit guide. And this exhibit guide pretty much will tell you the history of San Salvador, the real San Salvador, not a replica. Who Cabrillo was, where he was born at this point, which was not the case when we started building the ship. That's a whole nother really good story for another time. And it has frequently asked questions, it has ship specifics, so that anyone who has this guide, and if you don't speak or read English, there is a completely bilingual Spanish version for you also online. You can access this information. And it does a better job. Yes, Bob?
I just want to mention that the link to that is actually on the Docent resource page. Just click on it and you can get that guide.
So again, the link for that is on the website. We developed that exhibit guide specifically for the purpose of training people that aren't even as trained as you are as Maritime Museum docents in San Diego. So it is a wonderful resource. Claire, Nancy, Bob, David, Richard, I feel like I'm missing somebody else. Who? Emmy. Maybe it wasn't Claire? Oh, it was Emmy, not Claire. Oh, sorry. There are so many things, so that's why I assumed. These people came together and helped me with the exhibit guide, and each took a section, and it's well done, so hats off to the docents that put that together. Also, besides using that resource guide with docents, we have Bruce Linder's Galleon of Discovery. This was in lieu of a Mainsail Hall for members of the museum, and this is the complete history from Bruce Linder, and it's a really easy read. For a historian, he was very gifted being a juicier writer than a dry writer. No offense to our dry writers out there.
We have it in our gift shop.
We do have it in our gift shops, which was also free to members. And then in addition to that, to train people, we usually let them know of these resources, and these are Mainsail Halls, and each one of these issues covers the history for San Salvador. There's 3 of them. They're all in the gift shop, and if you are members, they're already in your bookshelves at home. And this is the last one, or one of the last ones. This is Dr. Wendy Kramer's one, and this has to do with her evidence of Cabrillo being Spanish. Sorry if you still thought that was not the case, but there we go. All right, so let's go back to what we're doing with San Salvador. So we went to beautiful places on the Pacific Heritage Tours. We trained their docents through an introduction to who Cabrillo was. We would set up the logistics of their touring system for their volunteers, and then we actually managed that once we went to ports with the ship on the Pacific Heritage Tour. They did make money. They were a lot of fun to do, and I hope that Pacific Heritage Tours continue in the future. However, we will need a new captain, and we will need a new person who essentially sets up the tours and is a liaison with the ports. While we're in ports, we always do educational information for their volunteers and or their boards sometimes. And depending on how we arrange Pacific Heritage Tours, I'll get your question. We share revenue with the ports, which is an unusual strategy, but we felt that it was our obligation as a state of California resource to share San Salvador with these ports to help these museums. And this was an important factor because for a place like Morro Bay that had a submersible and a tugboat, I believe, or some other vessel, and that's it, this was a big deal to come to their port. And when we went to their port, here we are in Morro Bay, you can see those smokestacks that everyone understands at Morro Bay. This visit allowed them to break ground on their facility that they have today. And our second visit, which was our last tour in 2023, allowed them to expand on that first level. So, San Salvador not only gave to our community here in San Diego, but significantly affected other maritime museums. That's something that everyone should be extremely proud of. Your hand up.
It's just, so when it travels up there, do they bring a sail crew or they just motor?
So we usually do, sail crew legs up the coast, and, so that's our sail crew. And on the way down, we do what we call adventure tours with guests. We still have our crew, but we bring people who pay to go. If you've been a passenger on the Pacific Heritage Adventure Sail, raise your hand. So quite a few people here. And those programs are a combination of education and recreation. And I'll get into those a little bit later. So the exhibits used to be open. You'll now see that they're closed on the ship because things wander away. This is a little bit idea of what we look like when we go away. And you won't ever be doing this as a docent that we do when we go away for the very purpose is that we train the docents in other places to do what you're gonna be doing here. And if you're lucky, you'll get a special t-shirt on those trips, but, when we were in Mexico, all of this was done by volunteers in Mexico with different historical organizations and colleges that focus on, Pacific history, Latin American to Mexican Pacific history, and they did a brilliant job. We did not open the hole in Mexico. We had it looking like it was all full of provisions, and in the future, I don't know if we're gonna be doing this here again, but that's how we prevented people from going down below. But we now have down below open for another exhibit area, and that was based on the fact that people always wanna go down below on the ship. We'll go through the 70s really quickly. Okay, so this is part of the Pacific Heritage Tour where we're with people. This is a beautiful shot that a sea urchin boat caught of us. The adventure lakes are also an educational opportunity because the people who go on this learn about how the ship was built. They get lectures from the different people on board. Dr. Cassidy, where are you, Jim? Dr. Cassidy is one of our main lecturers that has lectured several times on the trips besides Dr. Ashley. Do I have any other lecturers here that I'm not seeing? No, okay. In the last Pacific Heritage Tour in 2023, all the things that we had done in the past, we normally had volunteer help and education staff help and a bunch of different things going on. However, after COVID, we didn't have those people available, so a lot of it fell to those of us that were here and connected with it. So it changed up a little bit, but the same format existed where there were lectures on board, and we did activities besides training a whole bunch of new people how to sail this ship. So if you have any interest in learning how to sail San Salvador as a brand new docent, there are opportunities for you. It's called Sail Crew. Raise your hand if you're part of our Sail Crew. Okay, so there's plenty of people here to find out how to get involved with sailing San Salvador and operating San Salvador. And I highly recommend it because the best way to tell people about a vessel is to become part of its crew. If you don't want to be part of its crew, we have many docents that go on our weekend sails, and we continue to use her here in San Diego to do weekend sails. This is a page of the website. It's actually a very old slide because there's a lot more resources, but as I said, this is how you access videos, the exhibit panels, which are the educational components that we wrote up for you, the lesson plans, the model. If you've ever wanted to really frustrate yourself, I recommend opening up the paper model version. It's for kids and adults, and they're both extremely difficult. I don't really care how old you are. You just need a lot of patience and a lot of time on your hands. But they are beautiful if you do complete them. Has anyone gone on this page before here? No? That is your, oh, thank you. One of the things that we do when we go on Pacific Heritage Tour is that we created a QR code while people are waiting in line to see the ship, to access those videos. So I recommend for everyone's homework to at least find the page with the video on the website and then pick a video. They're all good. Seriously, they're all good. This is where I would tell you not only about the guide in Spanish, but we already covered that. So I'm going to tell you a couple more stories off script. But I want to look at the time. Okay, good. All right. So, your experience with San Salvador is going to be specific to you. And when you engage with visitors on the ship, not only will you be telling them what parts of the ships do what, you'll have the opportunity to find out a little bit about them. And all stories, if it involves them, if you make that connection with them, it's a stronger story. So here's a story of, this is a story about kids encountering San Salvador. So, and I'm gonna throw some history in every once in a while. So, San Salvador took off in 1542, very good. And what happened 50 years before that? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, it's our address here at the museum, 1492. And kids know that story, right? So when the kids came on board for one of our first visits to San Salvador, they knew the Columbus story, but they didn't know the Cabrillo story. And they certainly didn't know what years we were talking about. But 50 years, they don't really understand what 50 years is. But at the same time, they know it's a big, long time. So we were showing them around the ship and explaining the timeline of Cabrillo. And when I explained that this was 50 years after Columbus, and they kind of had this like glassy look in their eyes, and I said, it only took us 5 years to build the ship. But in Cabrillo's time, again, comparing to what you know about Columbus and Cabrillo, a lot of American history happened. And they looked back at me, and I don't think I look that old, but they said, so when you were on the ship with Cabrillo, and I think it's moments like those that you definitely enjoy being a docent. I think the slide you have in front of you is the fireworks, is that right?
Yeah.
All right, so the reason why I really wanted to show you this picture is not only do we educate people with San Salvador, but we also have thrown some amazing parties. And I can't show you the pictures that I want to show, but they're on my phone, so you can pull me afterwards. The ship gets used for a variety of purposes besides our purposes at the museum. So when we were in Santa Barbara in 2023, the first thing that we were a part of was their Spanish Days. And the city of Santa Barbara throws a big party for their heritage. It's a great free public event. There's lots of activities. And we were excited because we were invited by the city of Santa Barbara. And we were going to sail in to Santa Barbara with the accompaniment of the Chumash with their tamales. And it was going to be this really nice, like, we're sailing in together. But there was a change in tide in the Native American community in that time. The first time we took San Salvador up the coast, we were met by Chumash leaders and a tamal. They chanted with us, they gave us blessings, there was exchange of gifts. It was a very nice, not reconciliatory moment, but it had that feel to it, and it was very heartwarming to move ahead with that. And then nearly, I guess that'd be 7 years later or so, the tide had completely changed. And so they did not want us part of that celebration, and so they did not sail with us. And so it was a little contentious, but that is part of the Cabrillo story as well, is that contact moment being difficult for Native Americans can go in different directions. So that's just something that the guide will not guide you through, and I recommend talking with the docents that have been here a long time to get you through that. But ultimately, talking about the story and acknowledging the presence of Native Americans in the story from the very beginning puts you in a good light. So, for example, we had a group of local Kumeyaay school group through a program that's specific to them come to the ship, and I didn't know that they were part of this group, and I was explaining things, but I took the time to explain about the first contact and what had happened with the Native Americans, and just essentially including them in the story. And the teacher pulled me aside at the end and explained who she was and who these children were. And I said, oh, I hope everybody's okay with this information. I know it can be troubling. And she said, no, you addressed it, you didn't ignore it. And I want to thank you for that. And that is just a word of advice for everyone who's working with youth, especially if you're not sure where they're coming from, is to at least mention and address it up front, so that it's not an oversight and something to step away from. And if anyone has any questions about that, you can talk to me about that, but that was just something that I wanted to share with you because it does happen. We used to have the gifts that the original Chumash gave to us during that blessings on board the boat, and I will tell you that they went missing. And they probably didn't go missing by general vandalism, they probably were taken by local communities, because the idea of one tribe's artifacts on a boat that lives in San Diego is not a respected Native American practice. We don't know, but that's what we suspect. So in the meantime, what have we done to address those issues? Well, we've gotten very involved with Pacific Islander history. Those of you that were here last year saw the Hokulea's visit here. We are extremely well connected with the Polynesian Voyaging Society, which is the organization connected with that, and we've done a whole issue on Mesa Hall with that. So we are trying, and we continue to try. Not trying would be the problem. Trying and not necessarily living up to our own expectations is something that we manage. But the idea to keep on trying is what's important. So we get to Santa Barbara, we don't get the greeting that we thought we had, but instead, with the partners that we had, we were able to do different things in different ports. And so we were the host one evening for a female all mariachi band. That's on my phone. I really want to show you that one.
I have the video.
You have the video, Bob? Okay, check out the video with Bob. It was pretty exciting to see. And then there was a burlesque dance show with the sponsors that paid for our trip up there. A lovely woman has a dance troupe, but I would call it burlesque. These beautiful women just dressed in, they weren't that dressed. Scantily dressed, basically performed on the ship while the crew was off having dinner. So, do you have that video, Bob?
I don't have that one.
It's been redacted.
Alright, so sailing the San Salvador is a lot of fun. I do recommend as a docent that you take the time to get out there and be a docent on board. This is the video I'm sharing with you. It can be rough sometimes. This is generally as rough as it gets, except for the fact of if we're going into bad weather. So you can see it's kind of a gentle up and down. That really is gentle. What you don't see is that the next picture, and I didn't put it in because it was kind of embarrassing, is a wave completely swamps the front of the boat. So much so that Alex, our first mate, was head to toe solidly, like they're keeping submerged in a pool. That was really fun for us in the back. Right. Oh, you're lucky. I do have the burlesque show and the mariachis. Do I have video? You'll notice the gentleman in the blue shirt on the end of that picture with the lovely ladies. That's my nephew. He was our cook, and I made him go up there for the photo. So after this trip, the volunteer crew that was on board were so good with him, and he took to the ship so well that everyone that was involved with that trip, I want to thank you on behalf of the Sirota family, because my nephew joined the Coast Guard after this.
I thought you were gonna say he joined a mariachi band.
That too.
Colony.
When you go on Pacific Heritage Tours, you don't know what the reception will be of the audience that you're going to. And when we were there, we were sponsored by the Coastal Conservancy, and because it was free, we essentially opened our doors, and this is what we got every day.
I am looking at the line for the San Salvador on Sunday morning after we did same sort of gangbuster crowd on Saturday. And as you can see, there's lots of people waiting in line. In fact, the line goes all the way past the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. And yesterday it was even more packed than this. But a lot of these people came because they weren't able to get on yesterday. So the line goes past the corner around here, and then it goes all the way down past the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, stopping back there with the person in the reddish shirt.
So, what do you need to take a ship like this on the road? Patience and crowd control skills, yes.
If you go since one to go around the trip, when you drive up and talk to the folks in line as they're waiting and give them information and history?
Yes, so what we do with the people in line is usually myself, Dr. Ashley, and then thank God for Margaret and David and Dr. Cassidy. We talk to the people. We have an introduction that's off the ship, and we also partner with the National Park Service. We usually get an interpretive ranger to come along the Pacific Heritage Tours with us. All the time that we were building the ship, we had a dual program with the National Park Service about Cabrillo. We hope to continue that partnership with them because we both tell the Cabrillo story. And yes, we had docents come up and sail crew come up and join us at different legs to help out with that. And that is one of the main things that we need help with, because the tours that happen are essentially every 15 minutes. So you're looking at sometimes between 9 or 10 in the morning all the way to 5 something in the evening. Every 15 minutes, a new group of people on board the boat. So it's very hard for one person to do it over and over every 15 minutes. So I know Ray and I at some point, that's all we did. And thank God for David, Margaret, and Jim helping out, and the Rangers. So
I think the worst part was telling people that they couldn't come on anymore because you're at the end of the line.
yes, this was very, that's why I'm saying patience and crowd control is really important, because you have people that are waiting in these lines, and then we have to leave, like we literally have to leave, and we can't have any more on board the ship. You won't have that problem here in San Diego. This is the irony of San Salvador. When we go away, we're the biggest rock star because we're the only star in town, and she's hidden here amongst all our other ships. So it's just a different experience altogether. So this is what it would be crowd-wise. Oh, that was you, Bob. I think this is another day, but I'm not sure. Just the idea of how many bodies are on board the boat, you won't ever have that problem. The advantages of going away, though, is the partnership. So we were able to partner with the Salinian tribe in Morro Bay, That trip was good, so the one mishap with the Chumash in Santa Barbara was made up for the fact that the beautiful people of Morro Bay, specifically this tribal elder and Donnie Pierce, who is the educational chief for their tribe up there, partnered with us. They had educational booths, they worked with students and showed things. Pam made elderberry jam and sold it with bread that the tribe had made. It was a great experience. And on board the ship, though, it is basically camping at sea, and there's always recreation at sea. And specifically, depending on who's on board and what they bring, sometimes we do fishing at sea. And this was part of the catch that we had. It was unexpected, but we happened to be, I don't know what the luck is for anglers of the day, being able to catch a bucket full of fish and then having a cook that knew how to do fish tacos and fillet everything, so that was great. That doesn't always happen on Pacific Heritage Tours. I'm sorry I can't guarantee that, but generally, if you can go on a Pacific Heritage Tour as a guest, I highly recommend it. Like, even if it means like having TV dinners for maybe the month before so you can afford to go, it's well worth it. And I think I'm ending my slideshow just with one more story. Is that locked?
Yes.
Good, okay, I don't want this recorded. And I will definitely answer specific questions, but the whole point of building San Salvador was not just to do it to say that we could do it. It was purpose-built. And the purpose was not only to engage our own museum community, but it was to give a lifeline for the museum itself. And that idea still exists today, but now we're not talking about a vessel per se. We have enough. I'm sure we can make room for more later, but not right now. The big thing that's happening now, of course, all of you, at least the people that have been here for a while, know that our next phase of doing something big and risky is that big build-out project. It doesn't make sense on paper when we talk about the budget, and it seems very unlikely that it's gonna happen anytime soon, but it's in process, and it will take many years, but it could get done. We have Sally is our project manager. And I've known Sally for many years. I've sailed with Sally, and there's nothing she can't do when she does it. We have a very talented volunteer pool, and we have basically ideas of what we want this new gateway building to be for us. We just have to have the, I want to say, courage and the ability to continue doing things that push those envelopes, and it is risky. But San Salvador is a pure example of something that should not have happened. It sounded like a great idea, it nearly killed us, but it didn't. And in the process, we came away with things that have rewarded the museum over and over again, with grants, with programs, with products, and with the love and admiration of the people that have been involved with it. So many people have connections to the ship, and stories and adventures to tell about this ship. And whatever phase we are going forward with this new Pacific Gateway project, it's the same idea, it's just a little bit different form. And it's been my privilege and honor to be part of this organization on this journey with a lot of you. And I know going forward, there's great stories to be told about that next phase. But for now, I couldn't have imagined a better story than San Salvador for me and a lot of people that I've connected with through that ship than the people sitting here in this room. So, thank you very much.
Bottom line is, people are very unlikely to be sailing tall ships these days. Or people volunteering to go out and meet with our guests. We're all dreamers. That's what brings us here. We're all romantics, we're dreamers, and we want to be part of the story. And what you find out is that as you're part of the story, you get to build that story out in ways you never anticipated. So, thank you very much.
I have two Bob Greiser San Salvador photographs. If anyone is a ship picture aficionado or fan, I'm giving these to the docents. They're beautiful. Bob Greiser is a photographer of late, and these are just nice posters, so if anybody wants them, they are.
It is an opportunity for a raffle. Or just a donation to the museum. For those of you that were here last week, Dr. Ashley talked about museums, the history of museums, and one of the things he pointed out, which I think is important to remind you, is that the life we live today was not inevitable. It's based on a long history of interactions that went on, and so one needs to ask the question, how did we get here? And what is the significance of us being here? As he pointed out, the first people to discover the New World from Europe was not a guy named Columbus. In fact, the Danish Vikings under Eric the Red, coming from Greenland, were first in the New World, and his son Leif Erikson actually sailed down into the east coast of North America. They established a colony in Newfoundland called Olmedos. But this was not a colonization in terms of permanent residence. There's no evidence there of agricultural activity or tools. Same thing about domesticated animals. They came here seasonally and then also continued down the coast, at least as far as Massachusetts, because we have seeds from a butternut squash in Newfoundland, and it doesn't grow that far north. Also, vineland was what they referred to the area as, but grapevines, again, were not grown that far north. So they explored quite a bit of the northern East Coast and Hudson Bay area. But the colony in Greenland failed, eventually was abandoned, and that's why we don't speak Dutch. Danish. Excuse me. Huh? Yeah, one of them. So, what was the interest in getting around the world by boats from Europe? One of the main things had to do with the development of the Silk Road by the Mongols that allowed products from Asia to be traded all the way to Europe. One of the primary things of importance was spices, especially nutmeg and cloves, because they were used for medicinal purposes, not for eating or preservation. One of the problems in Europe was that they didn't produce anything Asia wanted. Actually, Europe was kind of a backwards area, and all of the advanced products being traded around the world, of course, came from China. In addition to spices, of course, porcelain, silks, other technologies that we'll talk about in a minute. If we didn't have anything produced that China wanted, what did we give in trade? Well, the only thing they would take was gold and silver. Well, one of the problems with that is that in Europe, there's not much gold production or silver. As a matter of fact, in all of Europe at that time, 1400s, the total amount of gold that existed was about 8 feet cubic size. That was it. So for trade, they were actually relatively impoverished. Spices essentially were valued as their weight in gold. That's what the price was, their weight in gold. Well, that worked fine until the thing called the Ottoman Turks ended up conquering Constantinople in 1453, and then the trade off the Silk Road was blocked for European transport, okay? Alternative routes were established to get around the Silk Road, mostly along, boats along the coasts, as you see in the blue lines here, to reach Europe. But it was, the cost of spices went up 5 times. So if they already had a problem being able to pay education, a trade, arm them with the tools that they would need for that trade, and then send them on their way. Hopefully never to be seen again. But there was, so that's what developed what we call today is the conquistadors. The people that were brave enough and adventurous enough to follow Columbus's route to the New World to try and find their own fortune were encouraged to do so. One of the early conquistadores that went around 1500 was a guy named Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Any of you ever heard of Balboa? Balboa Bar? Anybody know what he's famous for? Thank you. You'll notice on the previous maps that we had been looking at previous to this, there was only one ocean, right? The Atlantic Ocean. Columbus was given the title Viceroy of the Ocean Sea. It was Ocean Sea, not seas. There was only one sea, okay? Well, Balboa came over around 1500 on an expedition that went down along the northern area of South America, Panama, and Gulf of Aruba, and was one of the first people to really begin to understand the geography of that area. That voyage went back to Cuba. They received a portion of the gold and silver they were able to capture. He bought a piece of land, started raising pigs, found out he wasn't a very good pig farmer, and he wasn't a very good gambler either. And within a couple of years, he lost all his money, and his debtors were looking to arrest him and throw him in jail. Well, to avoid that, he stowed away on an expedition that was going to go south and rescue a colony to the east of this Gulf of Aruba. And so he stowed away on it inside a barrel. Well, within a couple days, he had to get out with him and his dog, Leonisty. And the captain, Martin Enciso, threatened to put him ashore on a desert island and lead him there. What saved him was the knowledge he had acquired on his previous voyage and to help guide the expedition into South America. Once they got to Alfonso Ojeda's governorship, they found out that the soldiers that were left there were mostly killed and died off, and they needed to abandon the area. The natives there were too violent. Their weapons were tainted with poisons, and in fact, Alonso Ojeda had been wounded in the leg and had left and gone back to Cuba. So Balboa convinced Enciso to move the settlement to the west of the Gulf of Aruba and establish a new settlement, which became the first permanent settlement in the New World, Santa Maria, and that settlement exists still today. When they got there, though, Balboa, being a very charismatic figure, had developed a few friends and allies. Enciso tried to establish himself as the mayor of the town, but was quickly removed. His possessions were confiscated, and Balboa became the governor, or the mayor of that area. Enciso went to Havana to complain, and Balboa sent one of his compatriots up to Castile to complain to the king, and ultimately a new governor was sent to replace him, Pedro de Avila. Now, Avila was a fairly bloody and violent guy. He displaced Balboa, and so Balboa, with his compadres, continued to raid the local natives, confiscating their gold and silver ornaments, sending the 1/5 that the royalty, the king was entitled to, back to England, thereby staying in favor with the king. And as he was raiding the local natives, one of the sons said, "Why do you keep bothering us? Why do you keep raiding us? We have very little gold and silver. Why don't you go on the other side of the mountain to the other ocean and raid them? They have a lot more gold." You know, well, other ocean? So he took himself, his soldiers, about 1,000 natives, allies, went to the top of the spine of South America, and lo and behold, another ocean. So they went down to the water, walked into the ocean with a flag, planted the flag, and basically stated, "I claim all of the ocean and the lands adjacent to it for the King of Spain." Where do you think colonialism came from? Right there. And he became the first mayor of the city of Panama. Well, Pedro de Villa felt like Balboa was usurping his power in the New World, ordered one of his soldiers, Pizarro, you heard of that, and to arrest him, try him, and execute him with his allies on the spot. And that was the end of our great Balboa. I'm surprised that a movie like Master and Commander hasn't been made for Balboa. He had quite a life. But basically, if you became a conquistador, went to the New World, conquered, became rich, you made your life. If you didn't, you never heard of him again. Well, now we have a Pacific Ocean. What's on it? How do you get to the Spice Islands, which was the object of the entire endeavor? And so a gentleman by the name of Fernando Magellan, you guys have heard of him, had been traveling around Europe, actually was Portuguese, was part of the Portuguese fleets that went and conquered India, was in several battles there, finally made it all the way to the Spice Islands, which we know as Malacca, engaged in several battles there, finally established a fort for the Portuguese, a colony for the Portuguese, and in his process became fairly wealthy, went back to Portugal, and hung around there for a while, but couldn't seem to get a commission as captain on one of the ships. He got frustrated, went to Morocco, fought for them for a while, which made the king of Portugal even madder. And so he said, "Well, the heck with this, if you don't appreciate me." He went to Spain and became one of captain and navigator for the Spanish, and he knew all the secrets of how to get to the Spice Islands. So he was appointed, along with one in Cala, to send an expedition of 7 ships, 450 people. Excuse me. And they left Castile, made it to South America, couple of the other captains of the 5 ships decided, oh, this is too dangerous, tried to mutiny, so they had to put down a mutiny. Finally found a route through South America, now called the Strait of Magellan. One of the ships were lost going through there. Continued up across the Pacific, which was far vaster than the Atlantic. They had no idea how big it was. Charted a number of islands. Got to the Philippines, mapped the Philippines, spent about 6 months converting the Filipinos to Catholicism. But in the process, one of the sultans who decided to become Catholic was having a problem with one of his neighbors. So Magellan said, well, I'll go over there and I'll sort it out. Well, he got to the other island of Mactan and found out he had been betrayed. About 1,000 of the natives of the area met him when he arrived. He ended up getting killed in the process. So when people say that Magellan made the first travel completely around the world, well, they have to include the time he was there with the Portuguese. Okay? So yes, he did make the first circumnavigation of the New World, but not from Europe and around, but from the Philippines and the Spice Islands. His second captain in Elcano continued back to Castile, but in the process, a couple of the ships had become rotted. They had to abandon them. They took all the equipment they could and filled up one of the ships, the smallest ship of the 5, the Victoria, and made it back to Castile after 3 years, and only 18 people ever made it completely around. Out of 450, you can see the amount of danger and risks involved in these kind of adventures. This turned out to be, even with one ship full of cloves and nutmeg and cloves, it still paid for the entire expedition, primarily because you only paid the wages of the people that made it back. So, 18 people? Yeah, wasn't too bad. Well, another gentleman who was a nobleman was trained as a notary and a mayor in Castile, also decided to go to the New World. And your royal positions when you went to the New World were still recognized. You became a mayor of a small town in Cuba and married the daughter of the governor. Well, he was still a very ambitious man and tried to convince the governor of an expedition to explore the continental area of America. At first this was agreed, and then the governor decided, maybe I want to do that. You know, I could profit from that. Rescinded Cortez's permission, and so Cortez pretended that he didn't get the message, took the fleet, went a few towns along the way, added more people and boats, sailed to where around Veracruz is today, and just to make sure that he wasn't caught and that people with his fleet didn't change their mind and want to go back home, he burned all the ships. Now that's a pretty confident guy. Well, he then engaged in battles and developed alliances with natives there, made his way to the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, where he negotiated with Montezuma to have an audience with him to basically introduce himself. But when he got there, he killed Montezuma's guards, took Montezuma captive, and was going to take over the Aztec Empire. He heard that another fleet was sent to arrest him and bring him back to Cuba, Panfilo de Narvaez. He went back to Veracruz, met Panfilo, defeated him, and then gave people of Panfilo's armada a choice. He could either go back to Cuba with those ships, or he could stay and fight for the conquest of the Aztecs. The gentleman we talked about before, Juan Calrillo, or Juan Rodriguez, he wasn't named Cabrillo yet. Juan Rodriguez was part of Narvaez's fleet, decided to go with Cortez. When he returned to Tenochtitlan, his lieutenant had been in charge, Pedro Alvarado, had basically killed and taken over the empire. The Aztec people were enraged and ended up driving Alvarado and the Spanish out of Tenochtitlan. A battle ensued, of course. Juan Rodriguez was one of the people involved in building barges and ships to carry armaments and horses and soldiers across the lake, and ultimately conquered Tenochtitlan and defeated the Aztec Empire. So he became the governor. Well, he self-appointed, but he was never appointed as a governor because people complained to the king that he was illegal and had no authority, had no mandate to do this. So he was named as the Marquis of the Valley of Oaxaca. That was his title. Another governor was sent, Mendoza, to take over. Of course, Cortez never liked that. But anyway, his lieutenant Alvarado, along with Juan Rodriguez, were ordered to go to the Pacific coast and conquer those areas and establish colonies in there. Well, we talked about Pizarro and his role in the death of Balboa. Pizarro was named the first mayor of the city of Panama after Balboa, and he made 2 voyages down south because he had heard about another empire, the Incas, who had much more gold and silver. After 2 voyages, the governor of Panama decided that's too much invested. He wasn't going to authorize another voyage. So Pizarro went back to Castile, appealed to the king, and the king said, well, all right, I'll author another expedition, but you have to raise 270 soldiers and 5 ships, I believe it was. Well, Pizarro couldn't raise that many people, but got his stepfather, a couple of his half-brothers, cousins, to go with him back to Panama, raised some additional troops when he got there, and on his final venture, traveled further inland, engaged in battle with the emperor there, Atahualpa, and captured, killed his guard, and said, all right, we'll ransom you for this room full of gold, you fill it full of gold, and 4 more rooms full of silver. So Atahualpa filled the rooms, said, let me go, and they said, no, and so they executed him. From there, they continued on to Cusco and captured Cusco, and they ended up taking over the Inca Empire. So the second voyage that attempted to go around the world was ordered to establish a colony in the Spice Islands. This was Garcia de Joffre Loaiza, and Juan Elcano, we talked about, who was Magellan, was the second captain on that expedition. They lost 2 ships trying to go around the Horn. One ship got lost in a storm and went up north along the coast to about where Acapulco is now. The other ships finally made it to the Spice Islands, so by that time, Loaiza and Elcano both died of scurvy. Cortez told one of his cousins that he wanted to send an expedition to rescue Loaiza, and so they sent 3 ships across the Pacific. That was the first expedition that originated on the Pacific coast. I got dragging it out. Gotta hurry up. So Saavedra, Cortez's cousin, made it to the Spice Islands, found the remnants of the Loaiza expedition, explored around the area, mapped a number of islands, and then attempted to get back to North America, but they didn't know at the time that the currents traveled south on the southern route, westward. But when you tried to get back, you couldn't because you were going against the current. So they wandered around a bit. There are legends in Hawaii that Europeans landed there. It may have been the Saavedra expedition. We don't know for sure. Well, now we got a problem. When the Treaty of Tordesillas was negotiated, they were talking about, well, Castile could go west and Portugal could go east, and there was no problem. But at the time, they didn't know how big the Earth was, how big the Pacific Ocean was, and now both Spain and Portugal were competing for the Spice Islands. So a new treaty was drawn up, drawing a line that gave Portugal the Spice Islands, since they already had a fort and colony there. And again, locking out the Castilians because they were given all of the Pacific. But what's happened in the Pacific? Very little. And you'll notice that on the line that segments the Molucca Islands and also segments the Philippines. And that'll be true. So what else is going on in the New World? Well, California, they thought was an island. According to fictional myth, was ruled by a Amazon queen called Khalifa. Well, they wanted to find their way up to the what they call the Strait of Anilan. That was basically the Northwest Passage, allowing a more direct route back to Europe, and also how to get to Asia from the New World. So Francisco Law in 1539 was sent by Cortez up the coast of Mexico and ultimately made it to the Colorado River. Obviously, California was not an island, so they turned around, came back, made it to La Paz, stayed there a while, around Baja, and all the way up to Cedros Island, about halfway up Baja. So in 1539, they knew that it was no longer an island. So this basically is the map that was drawn as a result of that information. And so Juan Rodriguez, under Alvarado, had been ordered to establish a shipyard in Navidad, where he built 13 ships. Pedro Alvarado was going to then be captain general and take the ships up along the coast and make it just off the ways Asia. As you can see in this map, Asia, or just off the coast, can't be very far. The world's not that big. Pacific Ocean isn't that big. Of course, we know now it's 1/3 of the entire Earth's surface. And Gabriel was sent with 3 ships, the San Salvador, the La Victoria, and the San Miguel. La Victoria was a cargo ship, about 100-ton capacity. The ton being a keg, by the way, not weight. So San Salvador was designed to handle 200 kegs or 200 tons, so not weight. The Victoria was 100 tons or 100 kegs. San Miguel was actually a launch where you could get in and out from the ships to land. It had 26 oars and could be stepped with a lateen, triangle sailing for traveling. Sorry, I should have had that up. His first attempt up the coast got as far as Point Reyes and got blown back in storms, came back to San Miguel Island to refresh. While there, he tripped, broke a limb, probably was suffering from scurvy, gangrene set in, and one Gabriel passed away. We don't know where he's buried on the islands, but that was the end of his voyage. But before he passed away, he convinced his navigator, Marcello Ferrer, to do one more attempt. Ferrer decided to go much further out to sea to try and get to Japan. Of course, got involved in severe northern storms, and after considerable effort, decided, no, we're not going to make it. They turned around, came back, ended up going to Acapulco, offloaded their logs, resupplied the ships, and the San Salvador was sent south to Peru to resupply the colony there, but was never heard from again. The Legazpi expedition was put together to establish the first colony in the Spice Islands. Legazpi was the mayor of Mexico City, and another navigator who was on the Loaiza expedition, Andre Urdaneta, was brought along on the expedition as the navigator and chief prelate, and they made it to the Philippines, established the capital in Cebu. Urdaneta established the first cathedral there and was the primary prelate, converting the Filipinos to Catholicism. And after a couple of years, the colony was established in the Philippines, and Urdaneta wanted to return back to Mexico, where he was a priest. He was given permission to do so, but based on his navigational skills and having been to the Spice Islands previously, he decided to take his fleet further north, almost to Japan, and thereby picking up the easterly currents, returning them to North America. So he was the first person that figured out how to leave the New World, get to the Spice Islands, and return to Acapulco. This is Urdaneta and the Urdaneta route, establishing the ability to create the Manila trade with the Manila galleons, which unlike the San Salvador you see here, were about 150 to 175 feet long, much lighter, could handle up to 1,000 people. And so the silver, primarily from the New World, was sent to the Philippines in exchange for not only spices, but silks, porcelain, and other trade, and then brought back to the New World, usually meeting around Mendocino, and then following the coast down back to Acapulco. In fact, there was so much wealth flooding into New Spain, and this would be shipped to Veracruz, but on other ships, and from there back to Castile. They had to limit the number of ships being sent, because it was just disrupting the entire world economy. There's too much wealth being shipped over. So they actually negotiated for no more than 2 ships per year were allowed to leave the Philippines to the New World. All right, well, I skipped the last slide. So basically, that's how we got to where we are today. But you'd think that we would be speaking Spanish. Or maybe even Russian. You've heard of Seward's Falling. Yeah. But of course, due to the Mexican-American War in 1848, 49, this area was conquered from Mexico and became U.S. Property, and that's why we speak English. But it could have been any of those. So that kind of brings you up to date. Yes.
Where can we see the documentary that Al and our museum helped make on Cabrillo's voyage on our San Salvador? I know they played at Cabrillo, but can we see it online or within
It's
our
on YouTube.
website?
YouTube.
Okay.
The way to get it is put in Juan Cabrillo Expeditions.
Yeah, something.
And when you go to YouTube, just type that in the search.
But there isn't a
And they
specific
pop up.
name for our video?
You can ask Al. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Yeah, it is the same video.
All right. So that brings you up to date.